Hey, Richard Bryce here, Tennis Hacker. In this video, I want to help you to improve your short attacking forehands. And the way that I'm going to do that is to show you some of my own practice, because this is something that I'm working on at the moment. Now, I'm naturally a right-handed player, but I'm relearning to play left-handed due to an injury with my right shoulder. And my plan is to hopefully become a 5.0 player and eventually go on to be able to play seniors ITF tournaments. So I'm gradually working on improving different areas of my game, and I've got to the point where I'm relatively comfortable rallying from the back of the court, and when I'm playing points, I'm starting to be able to push my opponents back a little bit, which is opening up the opportunity. I'm getting some shorter balls, so now what I want to be able to do is start to attack those balls and really find ways to win points rather than relying on waiting for my opponents to make mistakes. So in this video, I'm going to show you what I'm working on technically, and I'm also going to talk about some of the things that you might need to work on off the court to address physical limitations that are going to be really important for your ability to be able to put short balls away. The main thing I'm working on at the moment is improving my timing, because that's the key to being able to hit with power and still maintaining control. It's all about sequencing the body correctly and using the kinetic chain to generate the racket head speed. But in order to have good timing, the spacing is going to be really important, so that's my other focus. Now, there's two different footwork patterns that I'm using. On the shorter lower ball, I'm using a neutral stance, and on these higher balls, I'm using an open stance. And the spacing requirements are very different. When you're hitting the lower ball, I've got to whip the ball up and over the net, but I'm going to be setting up much closer to the ball. And when I'm hitting this higher ball, I'm flattening out the swing a little bit, but I'm going to be setting up further away from the ball. So I've set my ball machine to a random feed, so I don't know where it's going, and then I start by hitting cross court, and then I go inside out, and then I alternate between the two. But as I'm doing that, I'm really working on trying to get the right spacing. So the ball's in a different place, and depending on the height of the ball, I have to make those adjustments accordingly. And as part of that, I'm always trying to stay nice and low and wide and bouncy on my toes so that I can be as reactive as possible. But the key thing is to try and set up the right distance from the ball. So let's have a look at both of those shots from the side so we can talk about the timing more. As I said a moment ago, it's all about the sequencing. So after the unit turn, I'm initiating the swing by driving through my back hip. So you can see my left knee kind of kicking in and forwards, and you can see my left hip rotating forwards. That's very closely followed by the torso, but as that's going on, there's a racket drop being created as my arm relaxes, and then that effectively turns your body into a whip to create the racket head speed, and then hopefully you can make contact with the racket out in front. Now, as part of my timing, I'm also starting to work on being a little bit looser and more relaxed with my wrist. So previously this hadn't been a major focus for me because I had a lot of other things to work on. I was more concerned with the way that I was preparing and taking the racket back and that kind of thing. But now I'm getting a little bit better and I'm trying to get more power. It's all about trying to get that release at the right time. So can I time the hip and the torso and the release of my wrist from the racket lag in order to create that racket head speed and still get that contact point out in front? Now if we take a look at the higher ball, as I've already mentioned, on the lower ball I'm hitting it from a neutral stance. On the higher ball I'm setting up in an open stance. That's so you can drive and get up into the shot to create the rotation through the hips. Now the timing is kind of the same but different, so I'm still trying to sequence things: hip, torso, arm, followed by the racket. But you have to think about things in a slightly different way, and this is really the skill of developing high-level strokes. Every single shot that you deal with is different, so even in this kind of fairly restricted environment, I know roughly how deep the ball's going, but it is moving from side to side, so I have to make a calculation about where to stand and where to set up, and then you have to think through consciously at the start when to initiate that swing. So when do I start my hip drive and when do I start my racket drop and release? And what I want you to see here is I'm not quite as good on the higher ball as I was on the lower ball. So on those lower balls, I'm driving through the hip more effectively. I'm getting that really nice contact point out in front, and I'm getting a lot more pace. on these higher balls, I'm making contact with them a little bit late. Now, in terms of where the shot went, what you've just seen a moment ago is most of them are pretty good balls. They're going deep, they're going in the kind of the right direction, but I'm lacking power because I'm not quite getting the fluidity and correct timing on each of these shots. So that's what I'm working on technically. At the moment, I'm having to still consciously think through when to initiate my swing relative to where the ball is. So I'm better on the lower balls, but on those higher balls, I'm still a little bit late on quite a few of them. So I have to consciously think through that. Okay, in relation to when the ball's bouncing, I need to drive through my hip a little bit earlier. Now, in terms of the structure of my practice session, you can see at the start, it's all done in the service line. I do this to make it a little bit easier. So the ball is traveling less distance. It's much more predictable. So now I can focus more on being the right distance from the ball, and it makes the timing component a little bit easier. But then after that, obviously I have to move back to the baseline, because one of the most difficult things with attacking those short balls is you've got to recognize it quickly and then move up to it. Now, I know this ball is going short, so I don't have to worry about that, but it is going from side to side, so I do have to actively think about the spacing as I move towards the ball. So that's what I'm thinking about doing, trying to react quickly, stay nice and low, set up the right distance from the ball, and then get the timing piece that I was just talking about. And the training progression is exactly the same. So I start off working on my cross-court forehand, so all from the low feed. I then work on my inside-out forehand, again, all from the low feed, and then work on alternating, going between cross-court and inside-out. After doing that, I then move to the higher feed and do the same thing. So work on cross-court, work on inside-out, and then work on alternating. And the final progression that I worked on, I set my machine to random, so it can be going either to my forehand side or my backhand side or down the center. And it's also got a vertical variation as well. So I don't know whether the ball is going to be a little bit shorter and lower, or whether it's going to go a little bit higher and deeper. So now it challenges the visual side of things a little bit more, and I have to set up in the right position and either hit from that neutral stance and try and whip the ball up and over the net, or have to set up a little bit further away, hitting from that open stance and flattening the shot out. So the training session really kind of builds upon itself, working on the individual skills, getting progressively more difficult as I go through. So that's how I'm working on things on court. Hopefully that all makes sense. But as you might have experienced when you try this yourself, it's a hard shot to execute because the timing piece of the puzzle is very challenging, and that's because of the eye to hand and eye to foot coordination requirements. As we've just said, every single shot that you deal with is different. So even when I'm in that closed environment, I'm setting the ball machine up, I know where it's going, you still have to be able to read where the ball is so that you can set up the right distance from the ball, and then you still have to have the coordination to initiate your swing at the right time relative to each ball that you're dealing with. So the thing that holds a lot of players back, and this is actually something that used to be a problem for me on my right hand when I was growing up, is that people's visual systems don't work well enough to allow them to read where the ball is going at an accurate enough level, and their coordination isn't quite good enough, and between those two it really creates difficulties for the timing. Now, the way I had to address that with my right hand was by training my visual system and training my coordination. Now I'm learning left-handed, I've got the vision and the coordination because I'd already played at a higher level. So for me, it's a case of just implementing it on the practice court, and I'm gradually improving the more and more I work at things. But for you, there is a very high likelihood that you have limitations within either your vision or your coordination that's preventing you from having the sort of timing and playing tennis in the way that you want. Now, if you would like to change that, this is one of the main things that I help tennis players with. I teach them how to use neuroathletic training to improve their visual processing so they can react faster, so they can read where the ball's going more effectively, so they can track the ball through to contact more effectively, and so they've got better coordination so they can have better technique and use better timing. So if you'd like to learn more about that, I've created a free class that's going to teach you all about it. I'll place a link up there, and I'll place a link down in the description. Click on either of those links, it'll take you to a page where you can register for this free class, and towards the end of the class it's going to teach you or explain a little bit about my program and how I work with players, in case that's something you would like to explore a little bit further. Okay, I hope you have enjoyed this video and found it to be beneficial. Any questions or comments about what I've talked about, leave them down below, and I'll catch you next time.